It's 10:02. I say we go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the April 3rd Thursday web forum. I'm Hillary Morris. I work on user support and communications for both the Southeast and the South Atlantic Conservation Blueprints. And we host this web forum every third Thursday of the month right here at 10 a.m. And it's intended to be an opportunity to share the latest updates on the blueprint, get input and involvement from folks like y'all, and share exciting science in the world of landscape conservation in our region. So here's our agenda for today. I'll start by introducing our speaker, who will present for 30 to 40 minutes on our monthly topic. There'll be time for Q&A and discussion at the end, and then I'll wrap up with a preview of next month's webinar and a few staff updates. As a heads up, you probably saw we are recording this web forum, and that's just to provide a way for the one or two people who inevitably had a conflict to see it after the fact. The slides and the video will be linked from the calendar event on both the SECAS and the South Atlantic websites within a couple of days of this webinar. Any questions or comments before we get rolling? All right, so today's speaker is our very own Rua Mordecai, coordinator of both the Southeast and the South Atlantic Conservation Blueprints. As you have hopefully heard by now, we are in the midst of a major update to the Southeast Blueprint that's going to use consistent methods and indicators across much of the Southeast. So Rua is going to talk about the progress that we've made toward that improved blueprint so far and some of the next steps. So Rua, go ahead and take it away.
Sounds good. I will take it away, grab the stuff. This is fun to talk about because new blueprint, exciting improvements. So I'm going to give you the progress update on where we're at so far. I'll start with just a little background just to of how we got here, just to get everyone in the same place. Then I'll talk a little bit about the new draft indicators that we're working on for this year, and then show a little bit of some of the draft results. We'll talk about workshops, and then we'll talk about the future and next steps. Lots of fun stuff, just to get everyone situated, although most of you already know this. So the Conservation Blueprint, it's a living spatial plan, identifying important places for conservation restoration. Yeah, ton of people using it. That seems to grow every day, particularly to bring in new funding and inform their conservation decisions. And it's set up to help bring in some new funding, conservation funding to the South, and just help us all use the resources we have more efficiently. Now, when we're talking about the Southeast Blueprint, the bigger bit here, the history has really been in gluing together some great work that happened, particularly anchored by the work of a number of landscape conservation cooperatives fairly early on. And it came about because, you know, basically as we were trying to figure out how to do these kind of what are indicators, how do we do this spatial prioritization in all these different places, of course, there are questions about, okay, how do we need priorities for all of a state. We need priorities for bigger states. We need priorities across the whole Gulf. We need priorities across the whole Appalachians, and all these different components that tended to cut across these planning boundaries. And you know, basically, we worked on across the whole Southeast quite a long time ago now. Okay, how do we glue together the work of these different efforts in a way that makes them as consistent as possible? And so that's what we've been working on for quite a long time. That leads us up to the current version of the Southeast Conservation Blueprint we have. This is the 2021 version, as dark blue being high conservation value, light blue being medium. And so we did our best to pull together a number of different plans across that geography and make them as consistent as possible. So that's where we're at officially. Excuse me. As of right now with the blueprint. And so why are we doing this major update? Well, the biggest one that keeps coming up from blueprint users and within the broader governance structure and everything is improved consistency. We want to get better and better. We're trying to use this across larger scales. We want it as consistent as possible while still honoring the fact that there's ecological variation across the Southeast. You know, Texas is different than Florida, which is different than Tennessee. But improved consistency keeps coming up over and over again. And we've been doing our best on doing that with just gluing different plans with similar indicators and similar methods. We back at least a number of years ago didn't really have a good technical way to do it well across such a huge area. And so it's now technically possible to do well. And the other thing is it's now more practically possible thanks to a lot of the previous work on integration across these different subregions. So as part of this, we've been trying to figure out how do you share data and indicators and metrics and stuff across the bigger Southeast, and what might work, and how do we accommodate the regional variation in different places. So it's now technically possible, practically possible, and people keep asking for it. And so we're tearing off the Band-Aid and going with consistent methods across as much of the Southeast as we can. And yeah, that's what we've been working on starting end of last year. So here's the timeline. So basically that November through February period has been about indicator development and review. Some folks might have been part of some of those teams too as we move forward. So getting the underlying data we're going to use across these big areas set. And yeah, then we've been putting it all together, getting the priorities ready, tucking everything together. And now we are basically almost at that May period where we're going to have the final draft of the new blueprint that goes to the various workshops. So as for folks that are familiar with the South Atlantic process and timeline, right, we go to the workshops. There's probably going to be, there are already, some known issues, things we can improve. And then we get all of y'all to take a look at it and find, poke at it, be like, hey, this looks good. This doesn't look so good. What's going on over here? And so that's a chance to really look close and help find some things that make sense or don't make sense. And then after that, we spend the next few months doing our best to improve that draft that y'all saw before it becomes final for that year. So that's the plan. We should have spatial data stuff around August, at least the data part. And then by October, the bigger release with the full Southeast blueprint where we stitch all the other pieces together. Because we don't have everything. Still going to be parts of the marine environment, Florida and the Caribbean and other places, and that we might not have. But we're basically doing as much as we can well. That is the overall timeline. And also just a reminder, this is also generally our yearly timeline that we do every year. So when I say, okay, this year's blueprint update is complete, that means we're going to start again on the next update, basically right after the last one's done. Let me start with the indicator side of things, since we've got a little bit more clarity on that now. So here's a list of the draft indicators we have for all regions. So these are metrics that no matter where you go, whether you're in Texas, whether you're in North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Florida, these are indicators of spatial data that we have that cover, it's technically almost the whole region because they don't go out into the ocean. But for all the at least the terrestrial and coastal regions, these all apply. And I say draft indicators because we basically are reserving the right to change, modify, update, even have new indicators if they're the most important way to fill some gaps we get from the workshops. So after the workshops, indicators, some of them will likely change just based on feedback we get from the workshop and how we can fix issues people see. So this is a list of ones that cover all the at least coastal and inland regions. And I'll give you a quick visual because sometimes just seeing a list is not as helpful. And in the spirit of the bigger Southeast expansion, I'm going to zoom into Columbia, Missouri. So to just give you a visual of what some of these look like. But these are ones that do cover the broader area. So here's one of the freshwater ones. This is natural land cover in floodplains. And so it's looking at % natural habitat within the estimated floodplain by catchment. That's what it looks like. This is our permeable surface indicator. So looking at some key ecological thresholds for water quality and supporting sensitive aquatic species. So again, darker colors pretty much always are better condition. Not surprisingly, it's a little bit worse as you get close to the city around Columbia. Imperiled aquatic species, so this is looking at counts of species of greatest conservation need that have been observed by those different HUC-12s. And so this comes from the Southeast Aquatic Resource Partnership. We always check back with them every year to try to refresh to get the latest data and information for all the region. So this year, just like in past years, we refreshed based on that information. And so they're synced. And on the terrestrial side, this is our intact habitat cores, and they're colored by core size. This comes from Esri and the Green Infrastructure Center. They're in the midst of updating this to even more recent land cover data, and so that probably won't be ready in time before we finalize the blueprint, but that might be something we end up using next year. So that's what the intact habitat cores look like around this area. I'm very tempted to keep talking about each one of these individual indicators because they're all fun snowflakes, but I know we don't have time for that. So I'm giving you just a little taste. Terrestrial resilient sites. Also, we've been trying to sync with recent updates and other components here. So this is looking around the area, those darker green colors being the most resilient terrestrial sites. This is what comes from the Nature Conservancy. Fire frequency may be less interesting around here. You can actually see a little bit of fire around this conservation area, but this is one. I think we're going to even make some improvements beyond that, but this is another piece that covers the entire Southeast, trying to get the importance of regular fire across just about everywhere. Urban park size. So now your colors are based on size of the urban parks. This is one of our cultural indicators. Equitable access to potential parks. This was one that was only in the South Atlantic and in the past year, and been making some significant improvements to that piece. So those darker colors are very high priority for a new park that would create nearby equitable access. But that's one across the whole geography. And then greenways and trails. This one's harder to see when you're zoomed out, but you can actually sort of see some of the trails going by the floodplain along the river, into Columbia, around some of the parks and things like that. So another cultural indicator, looking at sort of your overall experience of walking that trail, thinking about how long it is, what you can do on it, and how natural it is along the greenway itself. That's another one that it's expanded across a bigger area. All right, so that's just a quick taste, just to give you some visuals of what some of these things look like on the ground. Everything's 30 meters across the bigger area, resolution-wise. And yeah, so for coastal regions, there's some extra indicators. These are ones that cover the Atlantic and the Gulf. So we have things like coastal shoreline condition. So that's looking at that sort of level of armoring, naturalness of the shoreline. Estuarine coastal condition, that's bringing in sort of water quality, benthic quality, fish tissue contaminants, a series of sort of overall condition within those waters. Resilient coastal sites, and that's bringing in kind of the resilience of the salt marsh complexes and their ability to move, and also bringing in that migration space. So thinking about these migration corridors and what are going to be important as the marshes move inland, even if they're not there yet. Seagrasses, looking at distribution of seagrasses across the Gulf and Atlantic, and stable marsh, which is getting at marshes that are likely to persist over time versus marshes that are starting to degrade or go underwater. So those are some extra indicators for all the coastal regions. So not surprisingly, the seagrass doesn't really weigh that heavily on what's happening at the top in prioritization if you get into the Appalachians. Or an even more fun example is we're not using marine mammals to prioritize what's going on in Oklahoma. So those are some ones that cover all the coastal regions. We also have a number of additional indicators. I'm not going to go through all of them, that only apply to specific regions to account for sort of variation in ecology or where we have data. So there's things like Atlantic migratory fish habitat, Atlantic marine birds, and things like we tried to do an integrated grassland indicator, and the grasslands ones, we've been working on making a lot of improvements, but these still are going to need some work post-workshop. But as we try to put them all together, Not surprisingly, we ran into some challenges in how the grasslands, as you start getting to Oklahoma and Texas, and how you can kind of measure and get at these most important grasslands is a little bit different than what you see in the mountains and the Piedmont and some other places. And so as right now, we have them split into different Great Plains perennial grasslands indicator and a central southeast grasslands indicator. So this is just accounting for variation. There are other places like the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, which is also its own beast. So we have indicators like this Mississippi Alluvial Valley forest birds reforestation indicator. It's another thing we've been trying to do with all the indicators is bring in the restoration opportunities as much as possible into the blueprint itself. So this is looking at places that could basically increase these forest cores, forested wetland cores along the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. So that's just a little taste of some of the other pieces. We're trying to keep again things that capture the regional variation while being as consistent as we can. But yeah, so that's a quick list of what's going into the workshop draft, but subject to change depending on how the reviews come out. All right, so that's indicator development and review. The next step is the draft of the new blueprint and the workshops themselves, which is where we're at right now. We're kind of a little past the halfway point. Maybe we're at the halfway point. So this is the 2021 version of the blueprint. So this is, again, I've already showed it before, but I'm just going to go ahead and overlay the some of the draft we have right now. And so this is what the 2022 version is on top. We will have the Atlantic Marine, we just don't have it stitched together yet. And so this is not a change analysis, the differences between them. This is just, I stuck it on top. So this is the 2021 version. And you can see already, even within that 2021 version, you can see some of the lines where the data sets coming in are a little bit chunkier, or the methods are a little bit different as you go forward. And this is what's going to go to the workshops, in addition to the Marine, which I don't have in here. So we will have in the final Southeast blueprint, we'll also have some of the, the Caribbean and this part of the Florida Marine. We just don't have it included just yet in this. So just giving you a quick visual. These are some of the changes looking between the two, consistency wise. Now that's really zoomed out. So I decided, okay, let's just go in a little bit closer and look at a spot. So now we're in the kind of Southern Appalachians interior plateau area. So this is the Piedmont right here. This is, you can kind of see that big section of the Southern Apps right here. So this is the current blueprint here, which included the South Atlantic blueprint over here, the Middle Southeast blueprint in this bottom left area, and then Appalachian naturescapes filled in with some TNC resilience in the center point. So you can see a little bit of the difference especially in kind of resolution within this Appalachians interior plateau area. Now this is 2021, and then this is what it looks like for the draft that's coming forward. So I'll kind of give a little bounce back and forth to see some of these changes. One thing I'll mention again in a second too is we've also split this high category. So this area that's sort of the darker high, we kind of pooled everything because we had to match all these plans together, but we actually are able to get more resolution, not just in space, but also in priorities. So now there is basically a very high and a high class that capture the same amount, and a medium class. So you can sort of see within some of these subregions that we're all the same. We've got a little bit more resolution in that, in addition to a lot more kind of downscale detail on the priorities themselves instead of the big kind of chunky blocks. So not perfect. We've seen some good improvements in a lot of places from users that we've had some known issues in this region, and also a few other things we're going to kind of look at improving in this draft. But wanted to give you that quick visual of what it looks like so far. There are changes with the new draft. The big one is the consistent methods and indicators. That's a huge one, and that also brings with it a bunch of benefits in fixing some known issues and components there. So that's really exciting. More priority classes, which I mentioned a little bit. We're going to be able to break down the priorities a little bit finer than we had before, to just high and medium, which will help. I know some people are just like, well, this is all high. What am I supposed to do? So we're bringing a little bit more of that in there. The other thing you might have noticed when I'm showing this draft, although it's not like the final colors, is that we're planning on a color change for this kind of standard color of the blueprint. And that's to not conflict with mapping things like sea level rise and flooding. So I'll give you this sort of back here. So before, the blueprint was this classic blue color, but those blue colors are not so great when you're mapping flooding and sea level rise over top. So here's an example in the left, a real example where we were doing some analysis for one of our users, looking at sea level rise and blueprint priorities. And so if you look at it here, so these are green and protected areas. This is the little parcel that we're looking at. And you see, using the old blueprint colors, even if you get creative with sea level rise, it's kind of hard to have a good contrast. So this is looking at sea level rise is coming from the left here. It's kind of hard. Where compare that to this more purple color scheme where flooding and sea level rise inundation really looks significantly different, and looks significantly different from the green and protected areas. So really, this is more of a shift to make it easier from a mapping perspective for people to see the blueprint on top of the standard colors that are taken by everything else, like urban and protected areas and stuff like that. So that's another thing you'll probably notice as you're looking. Well, you might notice as you're looking at the blueprint. Which brings me to blueprint workshops. If you haven't signed up for one, do it. They're awesome. It's only an hour and a half online workshop in May. So there's more information on the SECAS Southeast website under workshops. And we've got a few different kind of workshop regions you get to work in. So if you want to do something within a state and some of the neighboring states, the initial ones are going to be state-based, so you can sort of see through your whole state. So these are the state clusters that are clustered by workshops. And then we also have eco-region-based workshops as well. So if you want to look across just the Appalachians Interior Plateau, or you just want to look at the West Texas, Oklahoma area, and think ecological boundaries, we're also going to have some workshops there. And we got some very fun, very cool little tools in store for you. So during the workshop, you'll be able to actually kind of zoom in to the priorities and kind of identify some places that make sense or don't make sense, and even overlay some other layers and things like that. So should be a fingers crossed, a solid improvement over the virtual workshops that we did last year as well. So yeah, blueprint workshops, sign up for them. They're fun. And these are also really critical for us because, like I mentioned, this is what we use to help figure out what's the highest priority things to fix as best we can in this year's blueprint and next year's blueprint and stuff like that. So we're always kind of taking all that feedback forward and looking at some of these places that come up to see if we're capturing them well. Yeah, so that's workshops. And then, yeah, so going back to the timeline here, we're partway through, and then basically later in the year, we're going to have the final version of the blueprint ready for y'all. But you may be thinking, oh, that's so exciting, but I need to use the blueprint now, and I can't use this newer version. Well, the good news is there's a bunch of user support staff to help you now for free, because that's their job. Hillary is one of them. You see her face up there in the top right. So if you want some help using the blueprint now and you can't wait till the new version, then feel free to reach out. We're glad to help you find your part of the blueprint and figure out the best way to help you use the current version and the next version. The other update I wanted to mention on this too is that not only do we have these folks that can help you use the blueprint now and into the future, but that that group is going to be growing. And so we've been targeting, geographic locations where we have less people and trying to build out this crew as we're getting more and more demand for the blueprint uses and also as we're doing this bigger expansion. So there's a few new people that are going to be starting fairly soon. Got a new person starting in a couple of months in Texas with a climate change background to help with user support in Texas and Oklahoma. And then also this year, we'll have another person in Oklahoma to help specifically in Oklahoma. And we also have a new person that's going to be starting next month. And he'll be stationed in Lafayette, Louisiana. And he has an NRCS background. He's been working there for quite a long time. So we're trying to bring different skill sets and cover some of the broader different regions with user support folks. So not only do you have someone to help you, but also you've got somebody to help you that lives somewhere near your area. And yeah, so that's growing now, possibly growing even more in the future. So that's pretty exciting. And we want to just be able to, again, keep up with the demand of folks that want to use the blueprint. Another thing that's in the works that I'm super excited about for like later this year, early next year, is filtering by indicator in our bigger Blueprint Explorer. So this is early days, still working on prototypes of these different pieces. But one of the big things people often want to find is like, well, where's my part of the blueprint? You got this big area, with all these priorities, and I get that. But how do I find the part that most aligns with what I'm interested in? The kind of the work that you do. Now, as I mentioned before, user support folks can help you with that now. So if you want to find the parts of the blueprint that fit with what you're doing, we'd love to go figure out how to do that. Using the indicators to kind of filter it down and find those spots, and help you combine it with other data and local information, because that's the idea of the blueprint. We always want to complement the local information you already have. So they're already there to help you, but recognize sometimes people just want to play on their own, or maybe they just don't want to reach out. We love talking and helping, but if you want to do it on your own or just want to explore first, we've been trying to automate some of the things that we do just to make it easier. And so one thing we've been working on is kind of letting you go into the blueprint and use the indicators and things to go narrow it down and find some different spots. So this is the early prototype that I think Brendan, our developer, just got working, I don't know, like a couple days ago. And this was using last year's South Atlantic blueprint just as a prototyping area. And so this is one, looking, okay, here's the whole South Atlantic blueprint, and here's the whole South Atlantic blueprint if you only look within amphibian and reptile conservation areas. Okay, and then maybe you say, well, I only want to look at large hubs of habitat within those amphibian and reptile conservation areas within the blueprint. And so that brings you down to these particular areas. So this is trying to mimic, some of the like, hey, I want to do floodplain restoration. Show me the floodplains that aren't fully intact but are close, that have a lot of imperiled aquatic species. So you can do stuff like that. Or you can look at resilient places that are also important for equitable access to potential parks. So all of those things, that's what we're working on right now, is letting you go into the indicators and basically use those to find your part. Same thing with threats also. Show me the places that are not likely to get inundated by sea level rise, that are also intact habitat cores, or that kind of stuff. So that's the big thing we're working on, and trying to get it nice and snappy and quick and interactive for you to be able to play with. So yeah, that's in the works. The other two big requests that are kind of we're setting the stage for, but the plans are more for Southeast Blueprint 2023, is expansion of some of these consistent methods to the Caribbean. We've got a lot of interested folks down there that want to help out and want to see those consistent methods get expanded to the Caribbean. So we do have a watershed prioritization for many years ago that right now is just in Puerto Rico for the blueprint. And there's a lot of interest in, again, bringing those consistent methods and finer detail to the Caribbean and Virgin Islands and that area. So that's kind of on deck. And then the other thing we're looking at is an expansion of those consistent methods to the rest of the Gulf, which is another thing that gets requested a lot every time people see the blueprint map and they see, you know, the parts of the Atlantic and Florida marine that are covered, and they're just like, well, what about the Gulf? What about the rest of the Gulf? What about the Texas Gulf and the Louisiana Gulf and the farther offshore areas and open ocean? So that's another thing we're looking at for 2023. In addition to the normal improvements and fun stuff we try to do every year. Yeah, so with that, that is a progress update on where we're at for building that more consistent blueprint.
We have plenty of time for questions, so feel free to pop yourself off mute or drop a question in the chat if you'd like to ask anything about what Rua just covered. Don't be shy.
So many fun changes. The other thing I didn't mention while y'all are thinking of questions is that another big push we've been doing as part of that more consistent blueprint is working with surrounding around the edges of the Southeast and thinking about how we can best integrate with what's happening in the Northeast, in the Midwest, farther out west. So, you know, it's kind of like, it's just like every question you answer adds another question. In this case, it's like every level of consistency you brings another level of like, well, what about outside the Southeast? What about this? So we're always trying to keep our eyes out on consistency and users that may need the blueprint across bigger areas or cut across the Southeast and Northeast or Southeast and Midwest or whole US kind of things. Yeah, didn't include that in there, which I should have, because it was all about building a more consistent blueprint.
Any questions? All right, quiet bunch today. I will just wrap up with a quick preview of next month's web forum, and then we will pause again at the end in case something occurs to you in the meantime. So, everything's set up again here. Next month's web forum will be May 19th, same time, same connection information as today. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Neil Ganju, who is a research oceanographer with USGS at the Woods Hole Coastal and Marine Science Center. So he's going to be talking about this new metric of marsh status and vulnerability called the unvegetated vegetated marsh ratio, or the UVVR. The idea behind this metric is that it helps establish present-day vegetative cover, it identifies stability thresholds, and then quantifies vulnerability to open water conversion. And so this is what Rua was mentioning about salt marshes that are vulnerable to degradation versus ones that are really stable and we think are going to persist into the future. And we're actually incorporating this data as an indicator in the Southeast, in this base blueprint called stable marsh. So we're really excited to hear more detail on how this data set was put together. And Dr. Ganju is also going to talk about how you can combine the UVVR data with other types of data, sea level rise, elevation, to start to really provide actionable information for managers on restoration targets and approaches for managing their coastal salt marshes. So definitely tune in if you are interested in coastal systems or salt marsh or just the blueprint. It's going to be a great talk. And then I always like to end on this slide, how to get more involved in SECAS. Definitely encourage you to sign up for the SECAS newsletter, which you can do using the footer of any page on the SECAS website, secassoutheast.org. Obviously, please reach out to your staff, including all those user support staff that Rua showed our little pictures. You can find our information at secassoutheast.org/staff, and all the partners who are participating in SECAS at secassoutheast.org/partners. And then please do explore the blueprint. Let us know how it's working for you and reach out if you need any help. That is it for me. So I am going to stop sharing and just pause again and see if any questions have come up. All right, hearing none. Yep, there's the link to the blueprint workshops in the chat. Please do sign up.
You beat me to it. I didn't see that you had put it in there already. You're too quick, Hillary.
Oh, no worries.
I went there to put it in and I was like, oh, you're so fast.
Glad you're coming to a workshop, Joe. It'll be great to see you. Like Rose said, we're going to be trying out some new cool technology this year. So hopefully everything will go smoothly, but we're really excited to have workshops across 15 states, which we've never tried to do before. So many great people to talk to. I'm excited to hear you all beat up on the blueprint and tell us where it's working, tell us where it's not. And as always, we'll be carrying forward that input and use this year's revision and beyond. So I hope to see you all in May. And thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.